So next up is Elsa. She'll be speaking about scaling up from local experiments to understand species and ecosystem responses to climate change in Southern California.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to just start by stating that I think experiments are absolutely crucial for understanding natural system responses to environmental change. They allow us to isolate the factor of interest and then attribute mechanistically the responses of species and ecosystems to those changes. So for instance, this is a passive warming chamber made by my graduate student in the White Mountains here in Eastern California. And I would argue, though, that these experiments can potentially be limited in what they can tell us if we don't combine them with other approaches. And so what I'm going to do today is to present two approaches to scaling up, and along the way highlight some of the challenges and opportunities that I see for us here at UCSD. And I'm going to start with a finished project that sought to predict species responses to climate change. And in this project, I'm focusing on phenology, or the timing of biological activity, because shifting phenology observed worldwide provides some of the best evidence that species and ecosystems are already responding to climate change. So for instance, in many areas, plants are flowering earlier than they used to, birds are migrating earlier, and an earlier green-up of the land surface is even evident in satellite images. And with these phenomena, I wanted to ask two questions. First of all, is it actually advantageous for species to be active earlier with warming? And then second of all, how much of this earlier phenology is due to warming versus other co-occurring factors? And so in order to do that, let's see. This must be a Mac PC thing. There's supposed to be a map here, but the map isn't that important. What I did was I teamed up with a group of fantastic collaborators on a global data synthesis where we combined observations of phenology made over time with experimental results where temperature was directly manipulated. And from this, we were able to gather data for many species and many locations. And we found two important results. First of all, species that flowered earlier with warming did indeed have higher performance. And this is important because phenology is easily and often observed. And so this can potentially help us identify species that are at risk for declines with future climate change. But we found something else when we compared these experimental results to the observations. That was very interesting to us, and that is that for species that were observed over time in a warming climate, they were substantially more sensitive to warming than would be predicted on the basis of experiments where temperature was directly manipulated. And this suggests that additional aspects of global change, such as rising CO2 levels, probably contributed to this increased sensitivity. So I think that this example highlights that understanding and predicting species responses to environmental change involves synthesizing diverse data sources and also contributing, really thinking about multiple factors at the same time. Also, over time, I think it's important for us to think about the potential for species to evolutionarily adapt to climate change. Now, I know that there are many other researchers here at UCSD that are interested in these questions and applying these same tools, and so I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to work together. Now, the second example is a little different. Instead of predicting species responses to climate change, here I'm predicting ecosystem level responses using a combination of experimental and modeling techniques. And this project really addresses this great challenge that I see. One of the greatest sources of uncertainty in future climate projections is our land-based carbon cycle feedbacks to atmospheric CO2. And this, quite simply, is because plant growth, processes like plant growth or decomposition from soils, have large influences on atmospheric CO2, and hence the amount of climate change that we're likely to see. Now, I don't need to tell you that here in Southern California, climate change for us means accelerating drought, and you've seen images like these in the news lately. But in addition to climate change, we're also experiencing a true biotic upheaval associated with invasion. So this hillside, you'll see here, has been invaded by exotic annual grasses following a fire. And these species grow very quickly and can prevent reestablishment of the native shrubs that would otherwise dominate this landscape. And you can imagine that this dramatic shift in species composition could greatly alter the ecosystem responses to future climate change. And so to address these challenges, I've embarked on this large-scale rainfall manipulation experiment where we're collecting all the rainfall on the tops of these shelters, collecting it, redistributing it onto plots that are either dominated by native species or these exotic species. Now, to scale up, I'm collaborating with researchers that have very different skills. David Lipson, who's a soil biogeochemist at San Diego State University, and John Kim, who's a fantastic vegetation modeler with the U.S. Forest Service. Right now, we're estimating carbon emissions in our plots, and this is graduate student Ellen Esch from UCSD demonstrating this technique in the summer when it's very dry and brown here. And then we're also working to improve a dynamic global vegetation model to predict how species composition over the landscape is likely to shift with future climate change. Then we'll put together these experimental and modeling results to ultimately predict carbon cycle feedbacks for the region. Now, I hope that this second example has shown you that predicting ecosystem-level responses to climate change requires very diverse skills and disciplines. So, for instance, plant and microbial ecology, soil biogeochemistry, modeling, social sciences, et cetera. And if we look across the diverse departments that we have here at UCSD, in some cases those disciplines are represented, in other cases they are not. And so, I think we really have an opportunity right now through this planning process to create a group of interdisciplinary environmental scientists that are interested in these topics, where we can leverage certainly our existing strength, but we're also going to need to fill some of these disciplinary gaps. And finally, and I know I have just a minute left, I want to acknowledge that there are some really fantastic graduate and postdoctoral researchers that have contributed to this work. And that if this planning process goes well, I think that we have the opportunity to also increase the impact on our training programs for years to come.
Okay, we have 3 minutes again. I'll just quick, the first question.
Yeah.
Applying these experiments that you're doing to ecological restoration, what a fantastic trajectory forward. If you could comment on that. And there is actually an effort right now coming out of the White House at the national level to look at ecological restoration along the U.S.-Mexico border. It's a perfect opportunity. How are you going to do that?
How are we going to do that? We are actually working on that. And I think that, you do have to understand a system in order to protect it and in order to restore it, right? You have to understand what species are supposed to be there and what processes are supposed to be occurring and how you can accomplish that. That is actually a very active area of research for us, and restoration is often called the acid test for ecology, right? If you can actually restore a system to its previous state, then you really did know how it was working. Yeah.
Other questions, please? Well, say thing.
Have you thought about links to fire?
Yes, I have thought about links to fire. So this is a piece that we can't address with our current approach, and it's really a limitation. So if you think about what fuels fires in Southern California, a lot of it is human motivated, and so it's not just people setting fires, but it's also the pattern of land use that's set up by human activities, and the type of land cover that you have in those locations. So management has a big role to play. And so I think that this is an area where I think we could collaborate with more of the social sciences at UCSD and make some real progress.
Not seeing any. Have you considered focusing on our region? I mean, the Tijuana River Estuary is one of the world's Ramsar sites. We're a hotspot of biodiversity loss, and the border that's going up is creating all sorts of crazy stuff. Is that in your agenda at all?
It isn't yet, but it's one of those things where if there are the right collaborators in place, where there are people that can actually quantify that biodiversity as well as the ecosystem components and the land use, that would be a very fruitful avenue for future research.
And I'm scanning. Do I see? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That's a great question. So the question is what does this feedback loop represent? So right now, this is currently the greatest source of uncertainty in our projections of future climate change. And right now, the models say it's a positive feedback, so that in a warming climate, you're likely to see more carbon get released. However, both the production component, where CO2 gets taken out of the atmosphere by plants, and the decomposition component, where carbon is being released from systems, both of those are influenced with different sensitivities in different places. So this is a really complicated and interesting, fascinating problem, and one that has to get tackled by a true interdisciplinary team.
Okay. All right. Thank you.